O sovereign God, O matchless King, the saints adore, the angels sing, and fall before the throne of grace. To you belongs the highest praise. These sufferings, this passing tide, under your wings I will abide, and every enemy shall flee. You are my hope and victory. So praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. To the valley for my soul, thy great descent has made me whole. Your word my heart has welcomed home. Now peace like water ever flows. So praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. Praise the Father. So praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. 'Cause yours is the kingdom, yours is the power, yours is the glory forever. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, praise in power and in grace, the name above all other names, the name above all other names.
Think about a time in your life where you were humbled. I have lots of moments like that. Man, take your pick. Was it my first year in youth ministry when I told the business manager that I would have 100 teens coming to our youth nights, and by the middle of the year there were like 7 showing up? That's a good one. Is it the time that I called my wife by the wrong name when we first started dating? She was my wife then, and it's a surprise she's my wife now. The name was my ex-girlfriend's name, by the way. Maybe not humbling as so much as just stupid. Was it just any of the numerous times in between when I really thought I knew what I was doing and I told somebody, I don't need directions, and guess what? I needed directions. Humility is the worst sometimes. My name is Joel Stepanek, and when I think about humility, I don't always think about something that's liberating or freeing. I think about humiliation. I think about being down low, being cut down to size. You can think of any number of things that you associate with humility. I think about the football game where, one team comes in highly favored and they lose to the underdogs and they are humiliated. They are humbled. Humility, though, I have learned, plays a pretty big role, in fact, a critical role in our faith and in our entire lives. When you think about humility, what do you think of? Humility comes from this word hum, root means dirt, and that's the same place we get hummus, from the dirt. Humility is to be made low in a sense, but there's a couple ways that it can happen. And why do we want to be made low? And why is it so critical for us spiritually? Well, there's a couple ways that humility can happen. We can be humbled. We may puff ourselves up too much, get too prideful, and then in the case of those football teams, find ourselves actually brought back down to earth, back down to the dirt. Or we can choose to humble ourselves. We can choose to embrace humility as a practice and as a discipline. And I think this is a better path to choose, to voluntarily humble ourselves daily. There's this line in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is this great book full of teachings of our church. And it talks about how humility is the foundation of prayer. If you want to pray, we have to be humble first. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because when we approach God in prayer, really the first statement we have to make after we put ourselves in the presence of God is, God, you are God, and I am not. You are eternal, and I had a beginning. You know all things. Yet, to me, you are a mystery. And entering into that, now I have the disposition to do it, to enter into the mystery, to not think that I can make God confined to my whims or my desires. I can enter in to that awe-inspiring mystery without having to know it all. I'm liberated. Humility is the foundation of prayer because it requires that disposition of heart, right? Humility in prayer grows out into the spiritual practice that actually changes things everywhere. Humility allows us to listen more than we talk. And sometimes in prayer, I'll tell you this, I talk way more than I listen. And God's patient. God waits for me to talk, but I'll find myself talking and talking and talking, and then the Lord just smiling and saying, I'll wait. There's a really practical application for that too in our lives, isn't it? Do we talk more than we listen? I know I always don't. I like to be the one with the solution. I like to have an answer. I like to solve the problem. I'm sometimes, I hate to admit it, the one waiting for my turn to speak rather than sitting back to listen. I think we could all use a little bit more listening, a little bit more hearing, a little bit more humility. If it starts in prayer, we can take that practice out to our relationships. And what about relationships, right? Humility in our relationship with God puts us in right relationship with God, because the truth is we are finite. We had a created moment. We once did not exist, but God's eternal. God has always existed. And when we acknowledge that relationship of creation to creator, it doesn't make us less than. It actually exalts us in an incredible way. Somebody said that, Jesus, that the person who humbles himself will be exalted, because the person who humbles himself is able to know themselves as beloved, as chosen. When I stop thinking that I'm owed something by God, suddenly my life has a profound dignity and worth. God doesn't owe me anything, and nothing I could do could ever earn God's love or earn my existence or prove my worth. But I exist. And therefore, I just am worthy as I am. You see, humility allows us to see who we actually are. And in our relationships in our life, it puts us in right relationship with one another. It allows us to say, I'm sorry, to humbly own up for the places where we've fallen short. I called a friend just today to apologize for a way that I had fallen short. Humility. There's something liberating in that. I would rather be able to humbly apologize and ask forgiveness rather than try to find all of the ways that that other person was actually wrong. And we do that sometimes. We're so prideful, we don't want to admit fault, that we actually twist it around so that the other person is the one who's wrong. This is how grudges between families last for years and years and years. Humility allows us to really listen to our friends, to be present to our friends, to put the needs of another before our own. When we humble ourselves, and there's a fear in that, isn't there? That if I put somebody else's needs before my own, what about me? Who will care for me? The weird part about humility is it rubs off on people. As we love others, we find, not because we're trying to be loved, but they love us in return. And even as I think about work, I think about jobs, I think about careers, who would you rather work with? Somebody who is all about themselves, somebody who's filled with their own ego, somebody who's only looking of how they can advance their career? I get it. Like, you're probably thinking, yeah, but those are the people who get ahead, Joel. Maybe for a little bit. You'd rather work with somebody who shares credit, who lifts others up, who's humble. Those people go the furthest. Humility. It's the key to our spiritual life. And maybe that's why Jesus said that he's meek and humble of heart, and that we should follow after him. Jesus is the perfect example of humility, humbling himself, becoming human, dying on a cross out of love, humble enough to share in our experience, humble enough to share in the greatest experience, the most extreme human experience of death, so that we could be exalted to eternal life if we would humble ourselves to submit to him. So that is my challenge for all of us, for me, for you, that we would live humility, not as something to be feared, not as something to be scared of, not as a place where we would say, oh my gosh, I'm going to get humiliated, or if I ask for humility, God's going to kind of really answer that prayer and hurt me. No, God's going to liberate you. When you pray for humility, you're liberated from all of these disordered desires that don't give us what they promise. You're liberated from fears about what other people think, or if you're worth it, if you matter, because you know who you are. And you get a new heart. You get a humble heart that's like the heart of Jesus. If you're looking for a practical place to start, I'd encourage you to Google the Litany of Humility. It's a powerful prayer that asks for deliverance from disordered desires, deliverance from fears, and ask for all of the different gifts, and yes, freedoms that humility brings. And if you really live that prayer, it's a prayer that God answers, not through some horrible way of pushing you down to earth, but though if we need that, God grants us that gift, and it is a gift. But you'll find that that prayer liberates you and shows you, as you stand before God in humility, the foundation of prayer, who you really are.
Higher than the mountains that I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trial and the change. One thing remains, one thing remains. Sing higher. Higher than the mountains that I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trial and the change. There's one thing remains, one thing remains. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love, sing, your love never fails, Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. On and on. And on and on and on and on it goes. And it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. One thing remains. Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. Singing on and on. And on and on and on and on it goes. And it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. One thing remains. And your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. And your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. In death, in life, I'm confident, covered by the power of your great love. My debt is paid. There's nothing that can separate my heart from your great love. In death and in life, and in death, in life, I'm confident, covered by the power of your great love. And my debt is paid. There's nothing that can separate my heart from your great love. And your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love, your love. And your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love, your love, your love. Yes, Lord, your love never gives up, it never runs out. My debt has been paid. There's nothing that can separate my heart from your love, your unending love, your unbounding love, your unconditional love, Lord. One thing remains, and that's love. It's faith, it's hope, it's joy, and all those things come from you, Lord. Come, Holy Spirit.